I gotta say, I was disappointed in this movie. Now, that might be, my fault because I went in with high hopes based purely on the premise, but the execution was just not really what I hoped it would be. That's not to say that it was trash, of course, but, it's unfortunately just so painfully mid that it hurts. I almost wish it was bad because then I could dunk on it, but I can't dunk on it because it's not even horrible. It's just so mid. It doesn't make me feel anything. I feel like they just tried to fit in too many story threads within the short runtime that they had, and a large majority of these threads just end up unresolved, which just left me unsatisfied. And I'm not sure why they did that. They tried to cram so much into such a small story. It's just kind of weird. I don't know if they had bigger plans for this than what actually panned out. I have no idea, but they basically dialed up the action to a 10 and then forgot to add in the plot. The main story thread of the movie is about a young boy who's chased by a member or by members of a Chinese dynasty for reasons which are barely explained later, but anyways, we'll get to that. Along the way, as in like 5 minutes into the movie, he meets the lone swordsman, the main character, who basically becomes his bodyguard against these dudes who are trying to capture him. Pretty vanilla plot, but that's not really the issue. My issue isn't with the plot or anything like that. My issue is that despite the very simple and straightforward plot, which I can honestly leave at that right now and you'd still be able to understand the entire movie, the writers added like so many convoluted points of interests that just go nowhere. And for example, we learn through the story that one of the main bad guys is a foreigner, which is obvious by the blonde hair, blue eyes. And then we learn that, minor spoiler, the swordsman is also a foreigner. But then it goes nowhere. It's revealed that the main character, or one of the main characters, is also a foreigner. For what? I couldn't tell you. Now, we don't need a reason for him to be a foreigner. I'll give you that. But then why make him one? Other than to just put an obvious parallel between the main character and the quote-unquote main antagonist. It's like the parallel is there just solely because they didn't think that it was obvious enough for the audience that the swordsman and the foreigner were already fated to fight, despite the many story beats setting up their fight and the segment when they literally have an unfinished fight setting up the final fight. Like, I don't need you to make it any more obvious than it already was. I don't know who this movie was intended for, unless it was intended for toddlers. I don't need this much hand-holding. And it's funny because hand-holding is not usually something that I despise or just can't stand. Honestly, I'll overlook it 99% of the time. Because it just kind of, it flows over your head. Somebody repeats something that already happened. It's fine. I'm not going to dunk on the movie for it. But this was just so unnecessary. Because it's just disappointing when you realize that certain aspects of the story only exist because the creators think the audience is too dumb to remember. And it's kind of fucked in that way. Because I don't mind if you hold my hand and you keep reminding me of shit that happens to a certain extent, obviously. But when you do it in a way that adds more to the story, but it doesn't add more to the story really, it just adds more to the parallel, which is already obvious in the first place, and I don't need you to hold my hand. Please let go of my fucking hand. Anyways, another point in the story that really bothered me was the conflict between the Japanese and the Chinese. And listen, I get that the movie isn't supposed to focus on the relations between these nations and how things got so sour in the first place. You're supposed to just be thrown into the middle of it. But that falls apart when it turns out that the main character has been involved in this conflict. Again, spoiler, I'm sorry, this movie's been out for a while, come on now. Or so it seems at least, and yet he has no input on anything about this conflict at any point, despite the large amount of time that the movie spends showing the viewer that these two nations hate each other, and that this kid, or this swordsman, was part of one of these nations. I'm assuming the Japanese nation, although he's a foreigner, so I don't know. But he was part of one of these nations, and he did something that he regrets. And you would think maybe he has some disdain for the establishment, and I guess it's kind of assumed that he does, but they never really dive into it. They never really address it. The character never really fucking addresses it. None of them do. It's strange. There's so much in this movie that I feel should have gone somewhere. And without going into like full, just complete spoiler territory, like it's hard for me not to do that if I want to go further down that line. But I cannot believe that they put in so much that had a lot of potential and it never ever panned out in any way. It's like all that matters was the action, and it's just disappointing. And obviously, I'm not the expert on the topic, but it seems silly to involve such a heavy and interesting topic such as like a feud between two nations, and to only address it on a surface level through side characters that frankly most people don't really give a fuck about. Like, I already barely care about the main characters. You want me to care about the freak side characters that die in 5 seconds? I'm not doing that. Come on now. There's also the whole immortality thing, which is the reason why they want the kid, and you know, the connection to the kid for the immortality thing. And honestly, none of that made any sense. But I just kind of suspended my notion of disbelief to a certain extent, because I just took what the characters were saying at face value. And at the point in the movie where this is revealed in somewhat more details, because again, they don't really try too hard, I had already figured out that we wouldn't get anything more. So I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. Sure. Do whatever you want. Just get me to the fight at the end. That's all that was keeping me going through the movie. The fights throughout. There was a potential here, and it was squandered because they tried to do entirely too much. It's like everybody put all their shit into one basket and they were like, this is gonna bang. You're right. It bombed. Shit was trash. Not to that extent, but you know what I'm saying. If it was an anime, I believe that it'd be great because they'd actually have time to make us care about these characters, which, by the way, probably won't. But instead, you just end up not caring about either side in most cases. The main good guys are either bland or annoying, and the main bad guys are either bland and annoying. And that just makes it hard for me to just give a shit at any point. This story really reminds me of Rurouni Kenshin, actually, and I couldn't imagine the whole story being told within an hour and a half. But that's exactly what Sword of the Stranger attempts to do, and it just simply doesn't work, unfortunately. On a scale, I will give it a 5. Now you might be thinking, how is this a 5 if he talks so much shit about it? Well, the answer is that I genuinely do not think this movie's bad or even below average. Like I said, it's just painfully mid. It definitely has some shining moments, but it just hurts. The midness hurts so much that I have to put it at a 5.